The entire hall froze when red wine splashed across my white wedding dress. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even cry. But when my husband, a billionaire known for his calm, slowly stood up, what he did next made every jaw drop. Before I continue, tell me, have you ever been publicly humiliated and then watched love defend you louder than words? Subscribe for more stories like this because some moments change everything. I never imagined I'd marry a man like Adrian Pierce. He wasn't just wealthy, he was untouchable. A man whose name could silence a room, whose signature could build or break empires. The kind of man women dreamed of and men secretly envied. But he saw something in me when no one else did. I was a nobody, a scholarship girl with secondhand shoes and dreams too big for my small-town reality. I didn't belong in the circles where he moved, the kind of world where people wore confidence like armor and smiled only when the cameras flashed. And yet, he saw me. The first time our eyes met, I was serving drinks at one of his charity galas, nervous, underpaid, and praying not to trip on the marble floor. I remember spilling orange juice on a white tablecloth and nearly bursting into tears. But instead of anger, he laughed softly and said, "You'd be surprised how many mistakes built the world you're standing in." That was Adrian. Calm, enigmatic, and disarmingly kind. He made me feel seen in a room where I was invisible. His gaze didn't search for perfection, it searched for truth. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to be ordinary in front of someone extraordinary. I told myself not to fall for him. Men like Adrian didn't marry girls like me. They dated models, heiresses, women whose last names opened doors before they even knocked. But fate doesn't always follow the rules. One conversation turned into coffee. Coffee turned into quiet drives home. And those drives became something else entirely, a love story I didn't believe I deserved. The tabloids called it an impossible romance, a Cinderella delusion. People whispered that I was a charity project, a publicity stunt, a phase he'd grow out of. But Adrian never cared. He walked beside me like I belonged, defended me when the world mocked, and held my hand like I was his equal, not his accessory. He used to tell me, "Power means nothing if you can't use it to protect peace." I never understood what he meant back then. But that night, our wedding night, I finally would. Because that was the night everything changed. The chandeliers glittered like stars, cameras flashed, and for a moment I truly believed I had stepped into a fairy tale. But beneath the laughter, I could feel something brewing, a quiet storm hidden behind champagne smiles. And as I looked around that glittering ballroom, surrounded by faces that smiled too easily and eyes that judged too quickly, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone in that crowd wasn't there to celebrate love, but to destroy it. I just didn't know yet the first glass of wine would be the spark. That night, our wedding sparkled like a dream. The Pierce estate was transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings higher than any cathedral I'd ever stepped into. Soft golden light spilled across the marble floors, dancing off polished silver and the hundreds of white roses imported from Florence. Even the air shimmered heavy with perfume, champagne, and whispered expectations. Everywhere I looked, there was beauty, but none of it felt real. It was as if I'd stepped into someone else's dream, one too perfect, too expensive, too fragile to belong to me. The music floated through the hall, violins wrapping around laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes. The air smelled like money. You could taste it in the champagne, cold, sharp, and a little bitter. And you could feel it in the way people looked at me as if they were trying to calculate my price, to see whether the girl from nowhere was worth the billionaire she'd just married. My dress was handcrafted by an Italian designer I could never pronounce. The fabric shimmered like morning dew, and the diamonds on my veil caught the light with every hesitant step I took. Yet the more they sparkled, the smaller I felt. Every camera flash reminded me that this wasn't just a wedding, it was a spectacle. A performance for the elite. Senators, CEOs, royals, even movie stars filled the room. They raised their glasses and smiled, but their eyes asked silent questions. Who is she? How did she get him? How long will it last? I smiled back, pretending their curiosity didn't sting, pretending I belonged. But deep down, I knew most weren't there to celebrate love. They came to judge it, to watch a fairy tale and bet on how quickly it would break. Somewhere between the laughter and the applause, I felt something shift, a quiet warning I couldn't name. The chandeliers still sparkled, but the air grew colder. And just beyond the light, in a corner where the music softened, someone was watching me with a smile that promised my fairy tale was about to end. As I walked through the reception hall, I could hear them, the whispers. They floated through the air like perfume wheat on the surface, toxic underneath. She's pretty, but she looks nervous. Money can't buy class. She's the charity girl, right? The one his mother never approved of? Each comment was a knife wrapped in silk, every word disguised as a compliment, every smile hiding a sting. I smiled too, pretending not to hear. But each whisper slipped through the cracks of my confidence, settling deep where it hurt the most. I told myself to breathe, to focus on Adrian. He looked stunning in his black tuxedo, sharp, composed, a man completely at ease in his world. When his eyes met mine across the room, the noise softened, the chatter blurred. For a fleeting second, it was just him and me, two souls defying every expectation. His eyes always did that made the world disappear. But the illusion never lasted long. Because even in that moment of quiet connection, I could still feel it. The invisible line drawn through the room. They were born into wealth. I was born into work. Even as the bride, I felt like an intruder at my own wedding. I could see it in the way some women clutched their pearls when I walked by, as if love was something I had stolen. The men, too, looked curious, not admiring, but studying, the way a collector might examine a painting to decide if it was real or fake. A group of women nearby whispered behind their glasses of champagne. I caught one saying, "It's cute now, but give it a year. He'll remember where he came from." I turned away before the tears could betray me. The orchestra played softly, violins gliding like silk, but their music couldn't drown out the truth this room wasn't built for me. Still, I stood taller, forcing a smile I didn't feel. Because tonight, I wasn't the poor girl serving drinks. I was Adrian Pierce's wife, but deep down, a quiet voice whispered back, "For how long?" And as I scanned the glittering faces painted with envy, pride, and pity, I noticed one woman watching me from the far corner. Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't know her yet. But before the night was over, her name, Claudia Harrington, would haunt every dream I ever had. That morning, before the ceremony, my mother had taken my hands and whispered, "Baby, remember who you are. The world might try to make you feel small, but you're the only one who decides your worth." I held on to those words like a shield. She couldn't make it to the ceremony, her health didn't allow it. But I could almost hear her voice when the orchestra started playing, and I began that long, impossible walk down the aisle. The sun filtered through stained glass windows, painting the floor in colors I'd only seen in dreams. Every step I took toward Adrian was a step away from the girl I used to be. The girl who thought love like this was for other people. I remember the way he looked at me, steady, unwavering, as if I was the only thing that existed in that grand cathedral filled with people who'd never known struggle. When Adrian said his vows, his voice trembled slightly, the only time I'd ever seen him vulnerable. "I promise," he said, "to protect you from the world, even when the world is me." The crowd sighed. Cameras clicked. Even his mother, seated in the front row, dabbed at the corner of her eye with a white lace handkerchief, though I couldn't tell if it was from emotion or performance. I remember thinking, this is it. This is forever. But forever has a strange way of testing you. Because sometimes it doesn't break you all at once. It starts small. A look held too long. A phone call that ends too quickly. A silence that lingers in a room once filled with laughter. I didn't know it then, but that day, as I said, "I do," forever had already begun to crack. Still, I smiled through the vows, through the applause, through the shimmering tears in my eyes. And somewhere, deep down, a quiet part of me whispered my mother's words again, not as comfort, but as warning. Remember who you are, because the higher the world lifts you, the easier it is to forget. And when I looked at Adrian, my husband, my miracle, my storm, I had no idea that the man who once saved me would soon be the one I'd need saving from. By the time the reception started, the music was light and elegant, a perfect illusion. The orchestra played something soft and timeless, violins dancing around champagne laughter. On the surface, it was joy, but underneath, I could feel it, the tension. Like silk hiding steel. Adrian's business associates surrounded him almost immediately. Their smiles were polished, their handshakes firm, their flattery seamless. They spoke in the language of power mergers, acquisitions, and million-dollar partnerships, a world I'd only ever read about. When they congratulated him, they said his name. When they looked at me, it was as though I were an afterthought, a pretty accessory to his success. Some women approached, two wives of investors, socialites with champagne glasses that cost more than my first apartment. Their compliments were wrapped in sugar, but their eyes told another story. They lingered on my dress, my shoes, my posture, inspecting me like a museum piece that didn't quite belong in the exhibit. I smiled, nodded, thanked them. I played the role I was expected to play. But the more I smiled, the lonelier I felt. Adrian caught my eye once across the room and smiled reassuringly, but then his phone buzzed. He glanced down, frowned slightly, and leaned toward me. Just a quick call, investor in Singapore. I'll be back before the next dance. I nodded, pretending it didn't matter. Pretending that being left alone in a ballroom full of strangers was normal for a bride on her wedding night. As he stepped away, I could feel eyes following him, then slowly drifting toward me. The conversations quieted just a little, like people were waiting to see what the girl who married a billionaire would do next. I reached for my champagne glass even though I hated the taste. Anything to keep my hands from trembling. The bubbles fizzed against my lip as the string quartet began another song, something soft, melancholy. And then, the atmosphere shifted. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads turned toward the entrance of the hall. A hush followed the kind that says, someone important just arrived. I turned, my heart suddenly uneasy. And that's when I saw her. Claudia Harrington, the woman everyone once believed Adrian would marry. And the moment her cold smile met my eyes, I knew the night was about to change forever. Claudia Harrington. Her name alone carried weight like a royal title whispered through old money halls. She wasn't just someone people knew. She was someone they remembered. The daughter of Henry Harrington, one of Adrian's late father's most powerful partners. Their families had been intertwined for decades, bound by business, legacy, and unspoken expectation. I'd seen her before, not in person, but in magazines. Her photos always came with words like grace, elegance, and air. The press adored her. Society worshipped her. And now, here she was at my wedding. She didn't walk, she arrived. The moment she stepped into the reception hall, the air itself seemed to pause. Her gown was a deep, dangerous crimson, a color that demanded attention, shimmering like liquid fire under the chandelier light. It was the kind of dress that spoke in complete sentences. I know who I am. I know what I want. No. The fabric hugged her perfectly. Not too tight, not too revealing. Just enough to remind everyone in the room that wealth could buy perfection, and that she owned both. Her lips matched her dress, bold and deliberate. A string of diamonds wrapped around her neck like frozen lightning. As she crossed the room, heads turned. Conversations faltered. Even the orchestra softened, as if the violins themselves bowed to her presence. She smiled not sweetly, but knowingly. A smile that didn't say congratulations. It said, I remember when this was supposed to be me. Adrian hadn't noticed her yet, but others had. I caught the glances, quiet exchanges between guests, the kind that carried 100 unsaid things. The whispers started almost instantly, soft but sharp. That's Claudia Harrington. She looks stunning, doesn't she? I thought she was still in Milan, and then her eyes found me. It wasn't a stare. It was an evaluation, like she was measuring me, trying to find the flaw the cameras missed. Her expression didn't change, but something in her gaze said it all. I wasn't supposed to be the bride. She took a glass of wine from a passing waiter, swirling it lazily, her fingers delicate around the stem. Every instinct in me said this woman didn't come to celebrate. And as she started walking toward me, slow, poised, and smiling, I felt something cold coil in my stomach. Something told me the night had only just begun. It wasn't a glare. It wasn't even anger. It was worse pity. The kind of pity that dripped like poison disguised as perfume. Her eyes lingered on me for a heartbeat too long, and in that moment, I could almost hear what she wasn't saying. You're temporary. You don't belong here. Her smile curved slowly, deliberately, the kind of smile that could slice through silk. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, controlled, and devastatingly confident. Every step she took toward me made my pulse quicken. The room seemed to shrink with each click of her heels. I tried to steady my breath, to remind myself that this was my wedding, my night. But my palms were slick, my throat suddenly dry. People were watching. Of course they were. The whispers that had followed her entrance had now shifted into a low hum of anticipation. Everyone wanted to see what would happen when the ghost of Adrian's past came face to face with his new bride. I forced a smile, the polite kind that said I'm fine. But I wasn't. Adrian had mentioned Claudia only once, maybe twice. He'd said it was over, that she'd wanted influence more than intimacy, control more than connection. She doesn't love people, he once told me. She collects them. But seeing her in person, I realized something Adrian might not have understood, or maybe didn't want to. Claudia Harrington didn't lose, not gracefully, not quietly. And she hadn't moved on. There was no heartbreak in her eyes, no longing, no regret. Just something sharper, something hungrier. She wasn't fighting for Adrian's love. She was fighting for her pride. To her, I wasn't a person. I was a statement, a bruise to her ego that she intended to erase. As she drew closer, the crowd subtly parted, as if the universe itself made room for her power. Her perfume reached me before she did, jasmine and danger. "Congratulations," she said softly when she finally stood before me. Her voice was honey over glass. "Thank you," I managed to whisper. Her gaze flicked to my ring, then back to my eyes, and that faint smirk deepened, slow and deliberate. "You wear his name beautifully," she said. "Let's hope you can keep it." And before I could respond, she raised her wine glass, crimson liquid glinting under the chandelier, and smiled wider. A smile that promised something was about to break. When she reached our table, she didn't greet me first. She went straight to Adrian's father, Mr. Pierce, and kissed him on both cheeks. "Uncle," she said warmly, her voice smooth as velvet and practiced as theater. He smiled, clearly fond of her. "Claudia, you look radiant. I wasn't sure you'd make it." "Oh, I wouldn't miss this for the world," she replied, her eyes flicking briefly, deliberately toward me. That glance was a scalpel, a polite, perfect incision meant to draw invisible blood. I swallowed hard, forcing a small smile as my stomach tightened. Finally, she turned to me, her expression bright and gracious. "Congratulations, Evelyn, right?" Her tone was sugar-sweet, but I could feel the venom under it, the kind that kills slowly. "Yes," I said quietly, steadying my voice. "Thank you for coming." "Oh, of course." Her laugh was soft, melodic. I had to see it with my own eyes. Her gaze swept over me, lingering on my dress, my posture as if assessing how well a girl like me could fit into her world. Then she added with a smile that wasn't really a smile. "A real-life fairy tale." People nearby chuckled, but not kindly. It wasn't laughter, it was amusement, the kind that made you feel small. Before I could respond, a familiar presence returned Adrian. He looked between us, reading the tension instantly. When his eyes met Claudia's, something flickered there. Not affection, but old familiarity, the kind that never really dies. "Claudia," he said, voice polite but cold. "Glad you could make it." Her lips curved. "I wouldn't miss my old friend's wedding," she replied, lingering on the words old friend like a secret she dared everyone to interpret. The orchestra played on, the crowd pretended not to listen, but I could feel every gaze turning toward us. And in that moment, I realized Claudia hadn't come to ruin my night. She'd come to remind everyone exactly where she once stood, and how easily she could take it back. The air between them crackled not with words, but with memories neither of them dared to revisit in front of everyone. I could feel it, that invisible current humming between them. The unsaid things, the history, the tension that no smile could disguise. Adrian's hand rested gently on my back, a reassuring gesture, meant to comfort. But even that felt heavy under Claudia's gaze. He introduced me to a few guests, polite smiles and practiced compliments filling the space between us. And all the while, I could see her watching. Every movement, every glance, every time he touched my hand or leaned close to whisper something, her eyes followed sharp, unblinking, assessing. When the orchestra shifted into a soft waltz, Claudia glided to a nearby table, close enough to observe everything, but far enough to pretend she wasn't. She laughed at the right times, leaned in to whisper to the right people. She understood social choreography like a weapon. Throughout dinner, her laughter echoed louder than the music. Every toss of her hair was deliberate, every smile carefully timed for the photographers who still hovered discreetly around the hall. She wasn't trying to blend in, she was performing. At one point she stood, glass of wine in hand, and lifted it high. "To the bride," she said sweetly, her voice lilting with charm. "May her fairy tale last longer than most." Her table erupted in laughter, elegant, cruel laughter. Not at the toast itself, but at the irony of it. A few guests glanced at me, their smiles tight, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. My chest tightened, but I forced a smile anyway. The cameras flashed. "Thank you," I murmured, raising my glass just enough to acknowledge her. She winked slow, taunting, and took a sip. I turned back to my plate, trying to taste food that suddenly felt like ash. My heart thudded in my chest, too fast, too loud. I told myself she was harmless, that this was my night, that her presence, her theatrics, her little barbs couldn't touch me. But deep down, something twisted in my stomach, a feeling I couldn't name. It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't fear, it was something darker. And as the night unfolded, I realized that every glance, every word, every toast had been leading to one final act, the one that would leave the entire room breathless. When Adrian leaned close to whisper, "Are you okay?" I smiled and nodded, the perfect picture of a calm bride. But inside I was trembling. Every time Claudia's laughter echoed across the hall, my confidence cracked a little more. It wasn't just laughter, it was dominance. She owned every note of it, every flicker of attention it brought. And then she stood. The sound of her chair sliding back seemed to echo louder than the music. A crystal glass in her hand, half filled with deep red wine. Her movements were smooth, almost elegant, but her eyes were fixed on me. In that instant, I knew something was about to happen. Something that would change the night forever. Her smile stretched, not warm, not genuine, but sharp and deliberate. The kind of smile that promised beauty first, and destruction second. The chandeliers above caught the light of her diamonds, scattering it across her face like fire. Every shimmer, every sparkle was a warning. My heartbeat slowed, thudded, then sped up again, a rhythm out of sync with the music. The orchestra played a soft waltz, delicate, unaware of the storm about to break. But the guests, they sensed it. Heads began to turn. Conversations faltered. Glasses lowered midair. Claudia didn't have to speak. She commanded the room just by existing. And then she started to walk toward me. Step by step, slow, poised, unhurried, as if this were her stage and everyone else merely part of the scene. Her wineglass glinted under the golden light, the liquid inside catching the reflection of the chandeliers. Crimson, rich, and dangerous. Adrian straightened beside me, his expression shifting from calm to alert. And though no one else knew it yet, I could feel it in my bones. The night was holding its breath, because the next moment would decide everything. It happened so fast. So fast that for a heartbeat, no one, not even I, understood what had just occurred. Claudia stood, her laughter rippling through the golden light of the hall like the sound of breaking glass. Her wineglass shimmered between her fingers, crimson swirling in slow motion. "To the bride," she said, her voice smooth and honeyed, the kind of voice that could charm and wound in the same breath. She paused, eyes glinting with mischief. "May her charm last longer than her luck." The room stilled. That kind of silence, sharp and waiting, where even the orchestra dared not play. And then it happened. Cold liquid splashed across my dress. The impact was soft, almost graceful, the sound of wine meeting silk, but the world seemed to explode around it. Deep red bled through the white fabric, blooming like a wound across my chest. Gasps filled the air. One, two, then a ripple. Someone laughed. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." And I just stood there, frozen. My hands trembled at my sides, my mind blank. The scent of the wine, sweet, heady, almost metallic, filled my nose. I felt it seep through the layers of lace and satin, heavy and cold against my skin. For a second, no one moved. No one dared. Every eye in that grand glittering room was on me. The bride, the charity girl, the mistake dressed in silk. And then I saw her face. Claudia. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't sorry. She was satisfied. Her lips curved into that same slow smile, the one that promised beauty and destruction all at once. "Oh," she said lightly, tilting her head as if she'd spilled a drop of tea. "How clumsy of me." A soft murmur rippled through the guests. Someone stifled a laugh behind a hand. The air was thick with embarrassment, curiosity, and cruelty. I could feel the burn in my throat before I realized tears were threatening. I blinked fast, forcing them back. Not here. Not in front of them. I tried to steady my breathing, my body shaking slightly. My fingers curled into fists against the fabric. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor, to erase myself from every camera, every whisper. But all I could do was stand there, painted in humiliation. And then I looked at Adrian. He was silent, still, unreadable. His jaw was tight, his eyes dark, his expression caught between fury and disbelief. The pause between us stretched long and suffocating. I could feel it, the question trembling in the air. Would he defend me? I heard the scrape of his chair against the marble floor, sharp, deliberate. And then he stood up. The movement alone sent a current through the room. Conversations died instantly. He straightened his jacket, his gaze locked on Claudia, and for a fleeting second, I saw it. That side of him the world whispered about. The man who built empires. The man no one dared cross. His voice came out low even. Apologize. The words sliced through the silence like a blade. Claudia blinked, her mask of amusement faltering for the first time. Excuse me? I said, he repeated, his tone colder now. Apologize to my wife. There was a tremor in the crowd. Shock, disbelief, curiosity. The photographers raised their cameras but didn't dare flash. Claudia let out a soft laugh, trying to recover her poise. Adrian, it was just a joke. A bit of wine, that's all. He stepped closer. Not rushing, not raising his voice, just closing the space between them like a storm quietly gathering power. Do you think this is funny? He asked, his voice calm, but the calm that comes right before thunder. Claudia's smile wavered. She took a small step back. You're overreacting. Everyone knows. Everyone, he said, cutting her off, knows respect. His words hit the room like a command. Someone gasped. A waiter froze mid-step. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the staff. Bring another dress. And then to Claudia. You'll cover the cost. Her mouth fell open. Adrian, really? In front of everyone? Yes, he said simply. Because you did it in front of everyone. The weight of that sentence hung heavy. He walked over to me, slow and deliberate, his hand reaching for mine. His touch was steady, warm against my shaking skin. He didn't say a word, just took a napkin from the table and began gently dabbing at the wine on my dress. The gesture was small, but the message was massive. Every flashbulb clicked at once. Claudia stood frozen, her perfect composure fracturing. For the first time, she looked unsure. Adrian, she said quietly, almost pleading now. I didn't mean to. He looked up, his eyes sharp enough to cut glass. You meant to humiliate my wife, he said. You just didn't expect me to see it that way. The room went still again. And then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Not cruelly, not arrogantly, but with a cold finality that chilled even me. Since you enjoy toasts, he said, taking the untouched champagne flute from the table beside us. Let's make one. He lifted the glass high. To the guests, he said, his voice carrying through the room, smooth and commanding. May we all learn that real class isn't about money or titles, but about how we treat people when no one can stop us. The crowd erupted in applause, not polite, fervent. A standing ovation for a moment no one had seen coming. Claudia's face turned pale. She tried to force a smile, but it came out brittle. Her hands trembled slightly as she set her glass down and took a step back. For the rest of the evening, she stayed silent. Invisible, but me, I was still shaking. Even after the applause faded, even after Adrian turned to me and whispered, "Are you all right?" I couldn't find my voice. Because something about his calm scared me. It wasn't the anger, it was the control. That quiet, perfect control that could silence a room, destroy reputations, and still look like grace. I'd seen the man the world admired, the billionaire, the visionary. But tonight, I'd seen the man people feared. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't dared to before. He didn't just protect me. He owned the moment, owned the room, owned everything, including me. The rest of the night blurred in fragments. The orchestra resumed, the cameras clicked, guests whispered stories they'd tell for years. But all I could hear was the echo of his voice. Steady, deliberate, absolute. Apologize. It kept replaying in my mind. After the crowd began to thin and the lights dimmed, Adrian guided me out of the hall, his hand at the small of my back. Let's get you changed, he said softly. We walked in silence down the long marble corridor of the estate. The sound of our footsteps echoed, steady and precise. I wanted to thank him, to say something, anything, but the words tangled in my throat. When we reached the dressing room, he helped me out of the stained gown without a word. His fingers brushed against my skin, gentle but detached, like he was performing a duty, not sharing a moment. I stood there in silence as he handed me another dress, soft cream silk, untouched by the chaos of before. When I finally spoke, my voice was barely a whisper. You didn't have to do that. He looked at me not coldly, not kindly, but with something else, something unreadable. Yes, he said simply, I did. He adjusted his cufflinks, turned toward the door and added, People like her only understand public lessons. I nodded slowly, though a quiet chill crept up my spine. He was right. He'd defended me. He'd done exactly what any woman in my position would pray for, and yet, it didn't feel like comfort. It felt like power. Power that protected, but also possessed. When we returned to the ballroom, Claudia was gone. The crowd had relaxed. The whispers had turned into awe. Everyone looked at Adrian differently now, with admiration. and a little fear. And everyone looked at me differently too. Not as the charity girl anymore, but as the wife of the man who'd just proven he could make or break anyone with a single sentence. The music swelled again. Adrian took my hand, leading me to the dance floor. "Let's give them something else to talk about," he murmured. As we danced under the golden chandeliers, I forced a smile. Cameras flashed. Applause followed. But inside, I was somewhere else entirely. Because while the world saw a perfect couple reclaiming the night, I saw something else, a glimpse into the power behind the love. And as Adrian spun me gently beneath the light, whispering, "You're safe now," I couldn't help but wonder. Safe from what? From them? Or from him? He walked toward me calm, deliberate, like every step carried its own gravity. At first, I thought he was angry, that quiet, dangerous kind of anger he hid behind his perfectly composed face. Or maybe ashamed. Ashamed that his new wife had just been turned into a public spectacle. But I was wrong. When he stopped in front of me, his expression softened, just slightly. His eyes found mine, and for the first time that night, I saw something different in them. Not fury, not pity, something raw, unspoken. He reached for my hand, my trembling, wine-stained hand, and lifted it slowly to his chest. The crowd held its breath. Even the chandeliers seemed to pause their glittering. And then, in a voice low but strong enough to echo through every corner of the ballroom, he said, "My wife doesn't need to stay spotless to prove her worth. Her heart shines brighter than every diamond in this room." Gasps rippled across the hall. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," but no one dared to move. And then before anyone could blink, Adrian reached for the same bottle of wine Claudia had used to humiliate me. The deep red shimmered under the lights as he held it above himself. For a split second, I thought he was joking some kind of theatrical gesture to make me feel better. But then, he tilted the bottle. The wine poured over him, rich, slow, deliberate. It ran down his tailored suit, across his crisp white shirt, soaking into the fabric like liquid fire. Gasps erupted again, sharper this time, louder. Someone dropped their glass. Another person stifled a shriek. Adrian just stood there, drenched, the wine dripping from his hair, pooling at his feet. And then he smiled, a soft, devastating smile that made my knees weak. "If her dress is stained," he said quietly, "so shall mine be. Because in this life, we face everything together." The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It was the kind that burns itself into memory, the kind that divides before and after. Even Claudia looked like the floor had been ripped from beneath her. Her perfect lips parted slightly, her posture faltered, her eyes darting between us, confusion, disbelief, and something like regret flickering there. The crowd didn't know what to do. Some were frozen in admiration, others in shock. And yet slowly, one person began to clap. Then another. Then a few more. Until the room erupted in thunderous applause. It wasn't just applause, it was surrender. In that single act, Adrian had rewritten the entire story. What had started as my humiliation had turned into our declaration. I felt tears sting my eyes, not from embarrassment this time, but from something deeper. The way he looked at me, wine-soaked and unbothered, as if daring the world to question us. He reached up, brushed a strand of hair from my face, and whispered, "Now they'll remember this night for the right reason." I wanted to speak, to say thank you, to say why, to say I don't deserve this. But my voice refused to come. He slipped his arm around my waist, leading me gently back toward our table. Every step echoed like the beat of a drum, power and defiance in rhythm. People parted for us instinctively. No one dared stop him. No one dared meet his eyes. We sat down, and he motioned for a waiter. "A new bottle," he said calmly. "White this time." The waiter nodded, eyes wide, hands trembling. When the bottle arrived, Adrian poured 2 glasses. One for me, one for himself. The guests were still whispering, cameras still flashing, phones still recording. He raised his glass toward me, his gaze never leaving mine. "To us," he said simply. My throat tightened. "To us." We drank. And for a moment, everything around us blurred, the lights, the music, the stares. It was just him and me, lost in the quiet aftershock of a storm. But beneath that quiet, something else stirred. Because as much as my heart swelled at his gesture, a question lingered in the back of my mind. Was it love that drove him to do that? Or power? The applause had turned into admiration, the admiration into awe. Every camera caught his every move. Every reporter in the room was already writing the headline. "Billionaire Adrian Pierce defends his bride in unforgettable display of love." But behind that perfect headline, I felt a tremor of unease. Because I knew Adrian. He didn't do things spontaneously. He calculated, controlled, planned. Even his chaos had purpose. The applause was still ringing when he leaned closer to me, his voice soft but sharp enough to slice through the noise. "They'll never laugh at you again. It should have comforted me. It should have made me feel safe." But the way he said it low, certain absolute, sent a chill down my spine. As the night went on, guests approached us, their compliments dripping with awe. "Oh, Mr. Pierce, that was extraordinary. You've just set a new standard for romance. Such devotion truly remarkable." He smiled graciously at them all, his arm still around me, but his hand rested on my back like an anchor, heavy, firm, claiming. And through it all, I smiled too, because that's what you do when the cameras are watching. But deep down, my thoughts were spiraling. I replayed the moment, the wine, the applause, the way his voice had echoed through the room. It was powerful, beautiful, but also terrifying. He hadn't just saved me from humiliation, he'd turned the entire event into a performance, a spectacle of love or control that no one could forget. At some point, Claudia slipped quietly out of the ballroom, her face pale, her posture stiff. The queen of the room, dethroned. And yet, as she walked past us, she glanced at me not with hatred, but with something else. Something like warning. For a moment, our eyes met. And I swear she mouthed the words, "You have no idea." Then she was gone. The night continued, laughter resumed, music swelled, toasts followed, but for me, the world had tilted. When we finally left the ballroom, the corridors felt colder than before. Adrian walked beside me, his arm protectively around my shoulders. The wine had dried on his suit, dark stains across the perfect lines of fabric, but he didn't seem to care. I couldn't stop looking at him, the man who'd defied an entire room, who'd turned shame into triumph. "Why did you do that?" I finally asked when we were alone in the elevator. He looked at me, his reflection in the mirrored walls gleaming with quiet confidence. "Because," he said, "no one humiliates what's mine." My breath caught. There it was again, that line between protection and possession, drawn in wine and power. I wanted to ask what he meant, am I yours or your reputation's? But the elevator doors opened, and the moment slipped away. In the suite upstairs, he loosened his tie, pouring 2 more glasses of wine. "Red again?" I asked softly, attempting to smile. He handed me 1 glass and said, "Always red, the color of reminders." Reminders of what? He met my gaze, his expression unreadable. Of how fragile respect can be. I sipped, the bitterness of the wine burning down my throat. He came closer, brushing his thumb across the faint stain that still lingered on my shoulder. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said. "But next time, don't let them see you break." Next time. The words lingered heavy, almost ominous. Was there always going to be a next time? He kissed my forehead gently, set his glass down, and stepped toward the balcony. The city stretched before him, lights shimmering like a sea of diamonds. I watched him stand there, silent, powerful, untouchable. And I realized then, Adrian Pierce wasn't just a man who loved me. He was a man who performed love with precision, strategy, and spectacle. He didn't just protect me from the world. He owned the narrative. And as much as that scared me, a part of me felt drawn to it the way people are drawn to fire, even knowing it can burn. That night, as I lay beside him in bed, I could still smell the wine on his skin. It lingered like a reminder, sweet and dangerous. He was asleep, calm, peaceful. But my mind wouldn't stop, because I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a very public love, and a very private war. Adrian turned to the crowd, wine still glistening on his suit under the chandelier light. "If you came here for gossip," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "you may leave. If you came for love, dinner is still served." The room held its breath, and then applause. Soft at first, hesitant, like the first raindrops before a downpour. Then louder, stronger, until the sound filled the ballroom and echoed through the marble walls. The orchestra picked up the melody again, as if nothing had happened. The waiters moved like shadows, refilling glasses, replacing dishes. Guests began to smile again, awkwardly at first, then genuinely. The laughter returned, lighter this time, colored with admiration rather than mockery. It was as though Adrian had reset the entire night with a single sentence. And just like that, the music resumed. People clapped, some cried. That night, I realized something. Real wealth isn't in gold or glass towers. It's in loyalty. But even loyalty, I would later learn, comes with its own kind of price. After the crowd's energy settled into something resembling celebration again, Adrian leaned closer and whispered, "Go change. You deserve to be comfortable." A soft smile curved his lips, the kind that could melt the frost off any heart. He kissed my forehead gently, and for a fleeting moment, I forgot everything. The wine, the whispers, the humiliation. I excused myself quietly and went upstairs, escorted by one of the estate attendants. My reflection in the mirror startled me. The crimson stains against white silk looked like battle scars. And maybe they were. I slipped out of the gown and into a new dress, something simpler, softer. When I returned to the ballroom, the energy had shifted completely. People greeted me differently now. Their smiles were no longer condescending. They were reverent, curious, even envious. In their eyes, I wasn't the charity girl anymore. I was the woman who'd stood beside a man powerful enough to rewrite humiliation into legend. It was strange, empowering, and unsettling at once. Adrian was surrounded by guests again, everyone eager to shake his hand, to congratulate him on his extraordinary act of love. He handled them effortlessly, charming, confident, untouchable. When he saw me, he excused himself mid-conversation and crossed the floor to meet me. "Better?" he asked. "Better," I said, though my heart was still a storm. He tucked a stray curl behind my ear, his touch light. "Good. You handled yourself beautifully. That's what a Pierce woman does." A Pierce woman. The phrase lingered. Somewhere deep inside, the girl I used to be, the one who'd grown up counting coins and cutting coupons, wondered what that meant. Later that night, after the last toast and the final dance, we stood outside beneath the lanterns that lined the garden path. The estate stretched out before us, glowing softly against the night sky. Adrian took my hand. "You know," he said, "before the wedding, I transferred some of my company shares to your name." I blinked, caught off guard. "You... what?" He smiled faintly. "I wanted you to have your own power. Because a queen," he paused, brushing his thumb across my knuckles, "should never bow to a crown she didn't choose." The words were so perfectly Adrian, poetic, deliberate, disarming. But they also carried weight. Power wasn't just a gift, it was a chain, invisible, golden, and heavy. I felt tears sting my eyes. "You didn't have to." "I did," he interrupted softly. "You're not here to decorate my life, Evelyn. You're here to rule it beside me." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But somewhere behind that tenderness there was a flicker of something else. Calculation, maybe. As if he wasn't just giving me power. He was binding me to his world even tighter. When I woke the next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains like gold dust. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the headlines. The photos, the videos. Adrian Pierce defends his bride in the most romantic way imaginable. Billionaire turns scandal into symbol of devotion. The wine scene that melted the internet. My phone was flooded with messages, from journalists, friends, old acquaintances I hadn't heard from in years. Everyone wanted a comment. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. Clips of the moment had gone viral overnight. The slow-motion video of Adrian pouring wine over himself, replayed endlessly, set to music, dissected by bloggers and influencers. Some called it love, others called it genius. But not a single one called it what it truly was. Strategy. Because somewhere between that first splash of wine and his final words, Adrian had turned a scandal into a coronation. He walked into the room, fresh from a shower, his hair still damp. "You're trending," he said casually, like it was just another business report. I held up my phone. "We're everywhere." He smiled. "Good, let them talk." "Doesn't it bother you," I asked, "that they're dissecting everything we do?" He shrugged. "Public attention is like fire. Dangerous if you fight it, useful if you learn to control it." His calmness unsettled me. I couldn't tell if he was proud of what happened or if he'd planned for it. "Adrian," I said carefully, "you didn't stage that, did you?" He turned toward me, his expression unreadable. "Do you really think I'd let someone humiliate you just for a headline?" "No, I trailed off, hating that I couldn't finish the thought. He came closer, his gaze softening. "Evelyn, I don't plan everything. Some things are just instinct." But instinct or not, the world was already rewriting our story. By noon, we were on every news channel. By evening, Adrian's company stock had risen 2%. The internet crowned us the modern-day power couple. and I couldn't help but notice how perfectly that benefited him. A few days later, Adrian hosted a private brunch for family and close friends at the estate. I wore a cream-colored dress, no stains this time, no whispers, just smiles and congratulations. Mrs. Pierce, Adrian's mother, was among the guests. She had never fully approved of me, but that day she greeted me with polite warmth. "You handled yourself well, Evelyn," she said, her tone measured. "It takes grace to survive that kind of scene." "Thank you," I replied, trying to read her expression. She smiled faintly. "But remember, dear, grace can be misinterpreted as weakness. Don't let it be." Her words lingered long after she walked away. Later, as the guests mingled by the garden, I caught sight of Claudia standing near the gates. She hadn't been invited, but there she was, calm, unreadable, her red lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. For a heartbeat, our eyes met again. Then she turned and left, her heels clicking softly against the cobblestone path. Adrian noticed my gaze and followed it. "Forget her," he said. "She doesn't exist in our story anymore." But she did, because even in absence, Claudia had become the ghost of that night, the reminder that perfection, no matter how polished, could still bleed. Weeks passed, and the wine incident became legend. People quoted Adrian's words, reposted videos, wrote think pieces about the billionaire who redefined love. And yet, in the quiet corners of our marriage, I began to see the cracks. Adrian was busier than ever, meetings, interviews, deals. He'd given me power, yes, but also isolation. The more the world adored our story, the more I felt trapped inside it. Sometimes I'd find him in his study, staring out the window late at night. "Do you ever wish we were just normal?" I asked once. He looked at me, amused. "Normal is overrated. People don't remember normal." He turned back to his papers. "They remember legacy." That word legacy settled between us like a promise and a warning. One night, as we prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You think you know who you married? You don't." Attached was a photo, a blurry image of Adrian with a woman who looked unsettlingly familiar. The timestamp read 2 weeks before our wedding. My pulse quickened. I didn't know whether to believe it or delete it. But I couldn't look away. The woman's silhouette, the posture, it looked like Claudia. I turned to Adrian, who was buttoning his shirt, and forced a smile. "Who handles your security again?" He glanced at me, half distracted. "Why?" "No reason," I said quickly. That night, I couldn't sleep. The question that had haunted me since the wedding returned, louder this time. Was everything that happened that night spontaneous? Or was it all part of a game I didn't even know I was playing? The next morning, the papers carried a new headline. "Pierce Industries announces global expansion. CEO credits wife for inspiring vision." My photo was everywhere again, beside his, smiling, radiant, powerful. To the world, I was the queen who'd earned her throne. But behind closed doors, I was still learning the rules of his kingdom. And every day I understood a little more. That loyalty and control often look the same until it's too late to tell them apart. That night, as we sat by the fireplace, Adrian reached for my hand and said quietly, "Do you trust me?" I hesitated, just a fraction, but he caught it. "Good," he said, smiling faintly. "Because in this world, trust is more valuable than truth." I didn't answer, because deep down I knew the story wasn't over. It had only just begun. And next time, the stain wouldn't come from wine. It would come from secrets, because he believed I deserved to stand beside him, and not behind. I remember confronting him about it. "Adrian, you didn't have to do this," I said. He smiled that quiet, knowing smile that always disarmed me. "I didn't have to marry you either," he replied. "But I chose to. And I'll keep choosing you in boardrooms, in storms, in moments that try to break us." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about the irony of it all. The same people who whispered that I didn't belong were now watching me sit at the head of a table, my name carved into contracts they couldn't touch. But power, I learned, is a dangerous mirror. It shows you who you are and who you might become if you're not careful. Claudia called me a month later. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity, or maybe compassion, made me answer. Her voice was quieter than I remembered, stripped of the sharp edges that used to cut through every conversation. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she said. "For the wine?" I asked. "For everything," she replied. "I thought humiliating you would make me feel powerful. But it just made me realize how empty power feels without love." For a moment, I said nothing. Because what do you tell someone who finally sees the truth too late? So I said only this: I forgive you, but not because you deserve it, because I refuse to carry that night as a wound any longer. She exhaled, a sound like relief and regret intertwined, and then she said something I'll never forget. You're stronger than I ever was, Evelyn. Don't lose that. Not even for him. I never spoke to her again after that call, but her words lingered, hauntingly honest. As time passed, I began to understand what that night truly taught me. It wasn't about revenge or forgiveness. It was about revelation. Love isn't proven in grand gestures or flawless appearances. It's revealed in the moments when the mask falls off, when the world sees the stains, the scars, and still, someone chooses to stay. Adrian didn't defend me that night because he wanted to be seen as noble. He did it because, in his world of ruthless ambition and curated perfection, he saw something in me that reminded him what it meant to be human. Weeks passed, but people still whispered about that night. Not because of the spilled wine. Not because of Claudia Harrington's fall from grace. But because of what it revealed about power, love, and what loyalty truly means. At first, I thought the gossip would fade in a few days. It didn't. The tabloids ran headlines like, "The Stained Bride" and "Billionaire Heir Defends Wife in Daring Gesture." Photos of Adrian, drenched in wine, standing by my side with his hand around my waist, spread everywhere. Some people called it romantic. Others said it was reckless. But none of them understood the truth that night uncovered not about Adrian, but about me. I wasn't the same woman who walked into that ballroom in a white gown. That woman believed love was fragile, something you had to protect, polish, and hide from judgment. The woman who walked out, wine-stained and trembling beside the man who refused to let her stand alone, understood something different. Love isn't about perfection. It's about courage, the kind that stands tall when the world tries to humiliate you. For weeks after the wedding, our lives were a blur of interviews, dinners, and silent battles behind closed doors. Adrian's family tried to manage the story. His father wanted to handle the press professionally, which meant controlling every word I said. But Adrian stopped him. "She doesn't need a spokesperson," he said firmly. "She's my wife, not a headline." That was the first time I truly saw his defiance, not the billionaire's charm the world knew, but the quiet strength that made him impossible to own. He never talked much about the past, especially not about Claudia. But one evening, as we sat in his study, watching the city lights bleed through the glass, he said softly, "People like her mistake love for leverage. They think devotion is a currency they can trade." "And you?" I asked. "What do you think love is?" He turned to me then. No hesitation, no mask. "Love," he said, "isn't about who holds the power. It's about who chooses to share it." His words stayed with me, especially later, when I discovered what he had done, transferring a portion of his company shares to my name before the wedding. At first, I thought it was symbolic, a gesture. But when I saw the paperwork, the legal signatures, the irrevocable terms, I realized he meant every word. I owned part of Pierce International, not because I asked, not because he pitied me, and I, the once temporary girl, learned that the true test of love isn't how it begins, but how it holds you when everything tries to tear it apart. Sometimes I still think about that glass of wine, how something so small could expose so much. A single careless act turned into a mirror, reflecting who we really were beneath the polish. I think about the crowd, their gasps, their judgment, their silence, and how, in the middle of all of it, Adrian's voice became the only thing I heard. "If her dress is stained, so shall mine be." Those words changed me, because love like that doesn't just protect, it transforms. It doesn't humiliate, it elevates. And as I look back now, years later, I realize that the real story of that night wasn't the scandal or the spectacle. It was the moment two people stood side by side, unashamed of their flaws, unafraid of their scars, and unwilling to let the world define what love should look like. If I've learned anything since then, it's this. True love doesn't whisper promises in private and hide in public. It doesn't crumble when tested. It endures because it's built not on fantasy, but on truth. And sometimes, when life tries to spill its wine all over your white dress, love doesn't just wipe the stain. It pours another glass, smiles, and says, "We'll face this together." Before you go, tell me in the comments, would you stay with someone who stood up for you in front of the world? If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Subscribe now and turn on the bell, because the next story might just break it all over again.